Welcome back to Mapping the Divine. I'm Rhea Wilson, and today I'm joined by Professor John Thompson, a scholar of Buddhism, Asian religious thought, and comparative religion who is currently teaching at Christopher Newport University. Dr. Thompson's work explores Buddhist ideas, ritual and myth, and their wide-ranging manifestations, from pop culture phenomena like Batman and Star Wars to the work of medieval Chinese Buddhist monks. His teaching brings together philosophical, historical, and deeply human questions about how religious traditions still shape our understanding of the modern world. In today's conversation, Dr. Thompson will help us address some common Western misconceptions about Buddhism, teach us a little of why myth and ritual matter, and what Buddhism has to say about both friendship and violence. Professor Thompson, I'm so honored to have you here today. Thank you so much for joining us.
I'm glad to be here. So,
Well, thank you again. Before we get into your scholarship, can you tell us a little bit about what first drew you, someone who self-describes as a son of a staunchy Presbyterian minister, to study Buddhism?
I was lucky in that my parents they kind of gave me free rein. I think they ignored me, so I got to do everything I wanted to do in terms of like reading. I was just and watching TV. Again, probably not the best, but I was interested, of course, because I had a religious upbringing, so that was sort of foundational. But I always felt that there was more to it than what I was getting at Sunday school and stuff. This was the 1970s. Okay, so I'm old. So things were a bit different. Things were starting to open up a little bit at that time. And I had always had this interest in just other cultures, the way other people lived. Even as a real little kid, I remember just being fascinated. In my elementary school, we did a unit on Chinese culture, and I found that interesting. And it just so happened that my favorite TV show at the time was one known as Kung Fu, which is a show about that starred the late David Carradine as a Buddhist monk in the American West. And it always featured him, of course, doing kung fu, but it always had a lot of philosophy in there. And I just that sort of led me on. And as I went on through college, I just kept dabbling in this stuff, and eventually, um, just because I was an egghead, I was especially reading about a lot of stuff, getting into philosophy, and the this Buddhist, Taoist, and general Chinese stuff just kept coming back at me again and again. I felt that was really interesting. I'd read stuff, study stuff in Western philosophy and theology, and always found it fascinating, but it didn't quite do it. It didn't quite fully make sense to me. So I kind of took it from there. I just found that that's especially with Buddhism, the philosophical ideas and some of the practices. And as I began to explore, spent some time living in Greece. It's where I met the woman who's now my wife, and was getting into some of the Hellenistic schools of thought, like Stoicism. And they had a deep religious component that I thought was really interesting, and it kept reminding me of Buddhism. Eventually went to seminary, and my advisors really encouraged me to do comparative work, and just kept coming back to Buddhism and Chinese stuff, and it led me to doctorate work. And that's a long, rambling answer, but it's just something, for some reason, it struck a chord in me. This idea of something that might challenge some set, shall we say, rather staid, we'll say Western ideas and concepts, but could still exist in this context.
Did you see any similarities in your Presbyterian and early Christian background, um, and your study of Buddhism? And did one maybe influence the other?
Well, I remember actually having a conversation with somebody at a conference who was Yeah, actually, this is when I was in Japan. I was at meeting this one fellow, and he was really interested that I was raised Christian. Of course, he was not, but he was interested in Christianity. And he said, it was really good that you had this religious upbringing because it gives you a basic foundation that you can then uh, explore things differently. I said, I never really thought about that. He said, yeah, yeah. So I kept that in mind. I would just say that I was not satisfied with the sort of boring Protestant theology and worship that I was raised in, and Buddhism seemed to offer a more experiential dimension. I got involved in when I was in seminary, thinking about and studying mysticism, and began to engage in some more contemplative practices. And I found that Buddhism definitely helped flesh out some of that and give me some handles to deal with certain types of prayer and meditation. And so I would say that um, there is definitely if you want to call it a basic religious sensibility there that might be shared, but definitely the at least the stuff I got in my as I said in my religious upbringing didn't seem to quite fully work with what I was experiencing. So,
Yeah, and I want to ask you a little bit more about the mysticism that you're talking about. But before I get into that, I was wondering if
sure.
you can kind of lay a foundation about Buddhism itself for maybe people who are listening and who
Oh
don't
man.
know as much. I need that kind of foundation before talking about it. So for our more Western listeners, what have
Sure.
you found to be our biggest misconceptions about Buddhism? And is it even misleading to say that there's one unified Buddhism since there are so many, even thousands, some say, different schools of Buddhism?
Yeah, that's a good one, and it's good that you're asking that because I just finished teaching a semester course on the vision of Buddhism where we deal with that, and I do think like a bunch of contemporary scholars suggest we think of it as Buddhisms, plural, like you were suggesting, and actually some people say that about I would say about all religions. It's really you might think of like Buddhism as a blanket term for a lot of different related ideas, practices, and traditions. And the same could be for like Christianity, Islam. Um, so, in terms of Western misunderstandings or contemporary Western misunderstandings of Buddhism, one of them is that it's all about meditation, whatever meditation might be. That's one that is a consistent one because first of all, very few people know what meditation is. It's again one of those words that can mean different things. Or that it's just about somehow escaping stress and suffering, that it's all about peace. These sorts of things, at least in terms of the way it gets packaged, Buddhism does, they're not wrong, but they're definitely not fully right, if that makes sense. Um, and actually, Buddhism has long time also from when it was first really becoming known in Western circles. A lot of people were put off by this notion in Buddhism, this idea of the first noble truth that life is suffering. That somehow it's negative, and people get hung up on that and say, "Oh, it's a pessimistic view." Um, it really isn't. Uh, so I don't know if that helps. I think a lot of it comes down to this. I think particularly in the contemporary, we'll just say Western world, we have such a focus on an individual self and ego that we're distinct and separate. this may come in fact, it's in part, I think, um, emphasized, at least encouraged in certain forms of Christianity, this notion that you're an individual soul that's, trapped in a body or whatever. And that weird, and it strikes me as a very weird notion. The older I get, that strikes me as very strange that so many assumptions there that somehow I or you or all of us are separate, that we're stuck in these bodies, and that and therefore the idea is what we're going to get out of them and go to heaven or something like that. Doesn't it never made much sense to me. And it makes less sense to me now. And one thing I have found with Buddhist teachings and practices in history is, you know, things tend to be a lot more fluid and flowing. Um, and this distinction and separation doesn't make much sense in actual life. It seems like in actual life, we're constantly interacting and changing, and our thoughts and feelings are changing, and nothing stays the same. And yeah, we have a sense of continuity, but that isn't necessarily about sameness. It's about sort of almost a project of moving through. It's like we're almost a current. And now I'm starting to get into the more philosophical sense that we're all flowing together, intertwining. And I've just looked at my actual everyday experiences and see, well, there's just a flow of a lot of different things: sights, smells, feelings, memories, and coming and meeting with other sights, smells, memories. And it just seems much more open-ended and intertwined and interconnected than how I was used to thinking. So I don't know if that helps a little bit in the seeing this. Maybe just paying attention to what's actually going on. It's a lot more fun and a lot more horrific too. Some bad stuff happens too. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. With that, I'm curious to say, like, would you define Buddhism as, or is it accurate to define Buddhism as a religion, or is it more of a philosophy, psychologically therapeutic way of life, or something else?
Again, this is one of those things I come back to because so often we might make that distinction between, say, a religion versus a philosophy versus, as you say, a therapeutic way of living. And of course, my philosophical training comes in and say, well, what do we mean by a philosophy? What do we mean by a religion? What do we mean? I think when it comes right down to it, some of these ideas are a bit misleading. Uh, I mean, if we think of philosophy as an outlook and an understanding on existence in human life, if we then a lot of things could fit into that. Religion, well, what is that? It's a term we use, but it seems that I mean, most philosophies, at least I've seen historically, have some sort of sense of how people fit into the larger context and how people should live. That sounds similar to what we often find in religion. Um, and again, your point about therapeutic psychological stuff, I think particularly the way Buddhism often gets presented these days in the West, because it has such a well-developed understanding about human perception, thinking. It kind of overlaps a lot with psychology, and so in that sense, there's certainly a strong resonance there. So I would say Buddhism definitely, there is a sort of Buddhistic psychology. And in fact, a lot of Buddhism seems to um, not just resonate, but perhaps shed light on findings in psychology. A lot of interesting neuropsychological stuff with Buddhist teachings, particularly with practices of meditation. But so, is Buddhism a philosophy? Well, yes. Is it a religion? Uh, Yes. Does it have this more therapeutic psychological dimension? Definitely. It's all of that and none of that. So again, that's probably not helpful, but
No, yeah, no, it definitely is. And I was wondering if we could kind of now circle back to a little
mhm,
bit what we were talking about before, the mysticism and
yes,
the ritual and the myth. Um, all those things help us make meaning and interpret the world around us, as you were saying
yes.
earlier, like the sights and the smells and the
Mhm.
flow that you were describing. Can you tell us specifically about Buddhist myth and ritual, and how you've described them as present in powerful pop culture icons like Batman and Star Wars?
Okay. Well, I tend to look at myth, we'll just say myth as storytelling, as basic fundamental storytelling. And that's how human beings are, as far as I can tell. We've always been storytellers. That's how we understand ourselves with each other. Um, I kind of see that we are always telling stories to ourselves and others, and including others in our stories, and they'll help us maybe recompose our stories. Um, you asked me at the beginning, just you gave an introduction to me, it's a little story, and I told a little bit about my own journey. That's a story. Um, a um, a really interesting writer. His name is John Gottschall. He describes human beings as the storytelling animals. And I think that's what we are. Buddhism is traditionally in Buddhist context, traditional Buddhist context, it's always told in stories. You learn stories of the Buddha, the historical Buddha, be it his life story, Siddhartha Gautama, who, leaves his luxurious life, goes out to find the secret to existence, and eventually achieves awakening, and then begins to spread the teachings. How does he do it? By stories, because people will come up and ask him a question. The earliest Buddhists texts are all about one day Buddha was doing such and so came up and asked him this, and Buddha said, "Well, it's like this," and would tell a story. um, so I think that in terms of storytelling, that's just how it is. That's how we understand, we construct meaning. And storytelling is fluid. It does change. Um, and we revisit our stories. And you could look at Buddhism as revisiting a lot of these stories, retelling them in different contexts, and including what's going on in the context of when the story is being told. So that's kind of how it gets spread. So this idea, well, what is this? Oh, here, I was reminded of a story. Okay. Go with me on this one, Ria. Okay. Let me tell this famous story. Um, there is this Zen monastery, Zen Buddhist monastery. Okay. And there are three 12-year-old boys who are coming to see if they can join. So the first boy comes up to the master, because the master has to interview, see if they um, are worthy or not. So the master asks this first boy, says, "Who is Buddha?" And the boy says, "Oh, well, Buddha was this Indian prince who lived, like 2,500 years ago, who discovered the way of enlightenment and taught how people could escape from suffering and live better, fuller lives, and so on. And that's who Buddha is." And the master thought and said, "Yeah, that's true. That's true. Yes, yes, you can join." So he allowed him to join. Second boy comes up, and the master asks the same question: Who is Buddha? And the second boy is quiet for a bit, and then he says, "Well, Buddha is really, it means awake. It means awakened to truth. Buddha is the truth of all things. That includes all of us. We are all part of Buddha. Buddha is who we really are in the fundamental sense, as are all things." Master thinks about it a bit and goes, "Yes, yes, that is what Buddha is. Yes, yes, you can enjoy." Third boy comes up. So the master says, "Okay, tell me, who is Buddha?" And the boy says, "Buddha is a 12-year-old boy standing right here and now." The master immediately bursts out laughing and he says, "You are very right. You can come and you will be my personal attendant." So that's the story. So who or what is Buddha? Well, it's all of those things. But if you notice in that story, the master accepts them all because they are all right. The first person who said talked about Buddha, he gave a historical story, the historical Buddha and so on. Second one gave a more philosophical notion about Buddha as awakening to the inherent truth of all beings, that all beings share. The third one, though, that's the kicker, who realizes that, or is claiming at least to realize that Buddha is present here and now, that it's not some figure from 2000 years ago, and it's not just some mushy oneness. It's actual presence of the ultimate truth here and now within us right here. And that strikes me as a really good way of getting at what I see Buddhism is about. It's about seeing the various dimensions of what's going on right here now. The truth is right here and now, and everything comes back to what's going on right here and now. So, ritual. It's a good one. Um, a lot of times I think people think ritual is boring old ceremonies, and yeah, it can be that. But I think ritual really, when it comes right down to it, is a series of actions that we engage in. And it's not just human beings, animals have rituals of sorts, mating rituals and so on. Series of actions that enables us to be fully present in the here and now. So whether you're going into a Christian church and you start with a communal prayer where everybody joins together, or if you are, a Buddhist, you have your little, maybe a figure of Buddha, light the incense, maybe put it there, say your bow and say some devotional things, like take refuge in the Buddha, and so forth. The idea in ritual is to be, at least ideally, fully present here and now as a as part of our reality. That's what it's about. And this really is a way of, I want to say, finding meaning is not it. It's more like discovering meaning, just discovering what's really here. And there's something just it's very subtle, but satisfying in that, I would say. And I think that that's something instinctive in us. So I don't know if that helps a little bit there.
Yeah. And how did you connect this and how did you see this in um Star Wars and Batman? I'll start with Star Wars. You've
Okay,
written about the dark side of myth in Star Wars.
sure.
And I'll even quote from an excerpt from one of your articles. The
Mhm.
mythic structure of Star Wars has immense hidden power, and this power has a dark side. Can you explain to us what you meant by that, connecting it to what you just talked about?
Well, um, a dark side, of course, versus a light side. You might, again, just, well, in Star Wars, you're thinking about the Force, which has the dark side and the light side, right? Um, Reality is not always fun or happy. There is some stuff that is painful. I mean, not physically, emotionally to people. I mean, we get hurt, we die, we lose things. We also have fun times and good times, and that's all together, I would say. So, um, in that sense, I would say myth and ritual are ways of can at least help us see the fullness and accept it. We don't have to like it. That's um, and unfortunately, these things can be used, and people do it all the time because we have our, sometimes negative dimensions. We can use these things to hurt other people. And so that's what I think I was talking a little bit in Star Wars about how not only in the story is there, Darth Vader and the dark side of the Force, the Empire, but also when you begin to pay attention to those sorts of things in terms of, I would say, Star Wars as a cultural phenomena, which now I'm starting to get really academic, I guess. You see, oh, geez, this was part of a movie industry. It's a way of making a lot of money. And it, it's a way of perhaps you can get caught up in that, and there's nothing wrong with that. But maybe this can help us. Maybe the part of the point, if you want to, with say, if you want to be a Jedi Knight, is understanding there's something dark in there as well, and it can be used for a way to hurt people. And maybe popular culture industry can actually be used to hurt people at times. I mean, it costs money to get involved in all this stuff, and it can enforce some negative ideas. I mean, that's what a lot of propaganda is about. So I would say becoming aware of that and being on guard for all that and seeing that, okay, I can't get rid of all of that, but I can be much more careful. Maybe it comes down to just taking care, seeing what's actually going on and trying to be as careful in the sense of being, not only um, attentive, but also really caring and realizing that we can't control everything, but we can make choices.
And how did you connect all this to Batman? That's the one I'm
Batman, okay.
especially curious about.
Okay, well, again, think about Batman. I mean, what a great character. I mean, he's a hero, but he's got that. One reason why I think he's so popular is he's kind of what we might call an anti-hero at the same time because he's got this dark side. I mean, he's mild-mannered Bruce Wayne, well, in the day, but at night he's Batman, and he's hidden, and he lives in a cave, and I mean, so he's got a dark side, but he's good. He's tortured, but he is a good guy. And I connected him in that particular piece with this notion in Buddhism, which again has been very helpful to me on understanding these things. This notion of a bodhisattva. Bodhisattva is a being who is, it literally means awakening being. It's someone who is seeking to become awakened, but realizes that this requires helping others become awakened. Someone who is seeking to lessen their own suffering, but realizes that I can't do that without helping others. So, and I compare Batman in this particular article with a famous story in Buddhism. Again, it's a story about a past life of Buddha when he was a merchant on a sailing vessel who found out that all the passengers on this vessel were going to kill another merchant and steal all of his stuff. And so I think he was actually the captain of the ship who found this out. And so this captain of his ship was alerted to this or found out through his, the supernatural means. But anyway, he ends up killing the other, the people who were going to kill the merchant and steal his stuff. And he realizes he's harming them. But he does this intentionally with this idea, okay, I'm going to do something that is bad. I understand that's bad, but I'm doing this to save someone else. And I'm not only saving this innocent merchant, but these people who are going to kill him. I'm saving them. I'm preventing them from doing horrific stuff that will cause them to go through endless lifetimes in hell. I'm taking that on. I'm sort of taking on their darkness, acting on it in a way so that I can cause less harm, to put it really, really crudely. I think that's how I would say Batman can be seen as a bodhisattva, a dark bodhisattva. But you have in Buddhist tradition, you have these images of some of these bodhisattvas who are so want to help others, they will go into hell to teach them and to save them and to take them out of there and sometimes take their place. So again, that's interesting. When I just put that, I was thinking, geez, that sounds in some ways kind of like what we see with Christian stories about Jesus, right? That he took on the sins of the world, died for us so that we don't. And again, it's things like that I distinctly remember in seminary. I was really fascinated on seeing those possible connections. But again, coming at it from a different angle than and I can understand it in a different way. So,
That's really interesting. Um, Now, like with that kind of theme of maybe violence,
uh-huh.
and you spoken about the Buddhist myth of the serial killer. Is this a good segue to talk about Buddhism and violence? I'm
Hmm.
interested about maybe your work and also maybe common misconceptions about Buddhism and its associations with peace and nonviolence. Can
Yeah.
you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, that is such a complicated topic, and it has gotten a lot more academic attention, I would say, in the past, say, 20 or so years than it had before, because precisely because a lot of the ways that I think Buddhism was presented was, as this peaceful religion, and there's reason for that. One of the primary Buddhist virtues is what in Sanskrit, the ancient Indic language, is called ahimsa, which means non-harming, and that's sort of the guiding principle in Buddhism, that you don't want to harm or you want to cause as little harm to others as possible. That's actually a better way to put it, I think. Sometimes it's translated as nonviolence, but that's not really, I think, a good translation. Um, it turns out when you look closely at these notions of, well, what is violence and peace? Again, it's hard to disentangle them clearly. Um, because a lot of daily life involves some harm to other beings. I mean, we think about all beings live by basically taking things from others or drawing on them, especially animals. But you see that with plants too. There is a sort of, life feeds on death, and that's just how it is. Um, that's not necessarily a bad thing if you think about it. Not always. It's not always bad. One of the things I've been interested in Buddhism is this notion that there might be a good type of violence if we think about it. Um, Maybe think about in traditional Buddhism, the story of Siddhartha Gautama, the historical Buddha. He violated. That's what violence means. It's a violation. He violated social expectations. He ran away from home. He gave up his life of privilege, and he was seeking a way to get out of the life of suffering. But and India in his time was full of suffering, and he was able to find a way that involved less suffering, but he didn't fully escape from it. He himself died of physical um, disease, but he somehow was not harmed by it, really, at least. Um, So this notion that maybe there is, when we see how pervasive violence is on so many different levels, it's not just physical, maybe mental, emotional. Okay, it's part of how things go, but maybe it can be helpful. I mean, you think about certainly in some instances, like the civil rights movement. Certainly, most of the great civil rights figures were engaged in what we might call nonviolence, civil disobedience, but they were violating the law in many cases. So they were engaging in violence, and they actually invited violence upon themselves. So they were involved in violence, and in some cases did some inflicting of it. But again, it seems that human beings, especially, we seem to be violent, maybe more so than other creatures. Historically, I think all of human civilization involves some violence. And again, that's not necessarily a always a bad thing. I studied martial arts for off and on for a while, and that stuff is pretty pretty horrific, especially when I was getting into Krav Maga, which is a horrifically violent type of martial art, where we were training to cause harm. But the idea was that, and I do see this as you would do this only as a last resort. And generally, um, with the idea that you would want to avoid it. It's almost as if paradoxically having better familiarity with that stuff made it easier to, I don't know how to put this. We used to do in Krav Maga, we did a lot of it draws on stuff with boxing. And one of the things one of my teachers would often say is one of the most important things to know is how to take a punch, which I thought is that is actually the most effective way to fight is to learn how to take pain and push through it. And that is a type of violence. But ah, and again, Buddhism, like any religion, has been often involved in politics, and it has been in the past, and even today, it's been used to justify violence. Certainly, I think that we've been aware of violence done by in the country of Myanmar, which is predominantly Buddhist. They have, for the past 10 or so years, the government has been having a campaign of warfare against Muslim minority. We see this also going on in other places in the Buddhist world, areas of Thailand. Um, and again, some of what we see, again, just in the actual practice of Buddhism, we see that uh, in Tibet, which is often seen or portrayed as a peaceful kingdom. When you look at the history of Buddhism in Tibet, it's often been filled with violence. Tibet's been a very violent culture and now is dealing with violence because of invasion from the Chinese, and interesting pushback from that. Um, maybe maybe it's a misconception that we can be totally nonviolent. Nonviolence is itself uh, maybe a type of violence. Maybe we can be more skillful, less harmful in how we engage in violence, be much more aware of it. So so that we're not doing it blindly. Maybe this can help us curb at least some of the worst aspects of that. Because that's what I think what ahimsa really is, this guiding ethical notion of non-harming or causing as little harm as possible, but not somehow denying that you're completely harmless. Being aware that, yes, I'm involved in all of this, and I'll do what I can to cut down on.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Along kind of that thread, well, we actually met at a friendship and religion conference, and
Yes,
I've
we did.
always been kind of curious about friendship and Buddhism, and you've written very much about that
Yeah.
topic. And as someone who is neither a practitioner nor a scholar of Buddhism, my reaction to that topic would be as follows. If suffering comes from attachment and cravings, which in Buddhism, which fuels a cycle of rebirth,
Mhm.
wouldn't friendship be a form of attachment involving yourself in delusion? I mean, please correct my misunderstanding and please share with us your more enlightened understanding of friendship and Buddhism. But yeah, that's one of the other things that, in the same way, I think it's hard to sometimes process violence and non-violence in
Oh, yeah.
Buddhism. I also am curious about friendship and
Mhm.
Buddhism.
Yeah, that's well, first of all, you actually those are really good questions. They really are. And well, so I thank you, Ria. And it's again, it may that may have something to do with differences in what we mean by friends. um, Certainly, there is, I think, at least my study of and practice of Buddhism and so on has really opened me up to this idea about how all of us are connected to everyone that we deal with every day. And so we can never be separated from them. We're kind of enmeshed. Like even here right now. I mean, I believe it or not, you might not think of it this way, but I actually consider this is sort of this is a friendly interaction. We're kind of we're friends. We really are. I mean, we're and that doesn't that's a good thing. Generally, I mean, this is very helpful to me. I'm feeling engaged. I hope you are, and I hope this will go on to help others. And I think that, again, looking just at at this experience, what's going on here, it at least helps me to see, well, again, well, Buddha was all about this, the historical Buddha, but also as with Buddhism's spread. Um, he really did find, and we see this historically in Buddhism, that he needed other people with him. We have this notion that he went off by himself and got enlightened. Oh, kind of. Okay, yeah. And there is a sense in some strains of Buddhism about this notion that there can be a type of Buddha or awakened one who just goes off by themselves and does it all. But in fact, most of Buddhism is about interactions with others. And Buddha himself really, I would say, became fully Buddha with teaching, with sharing the teachings with others. And he got followers. And clearly, and he was their teacher. And in Buddhism, there's this notion of what's called in Sanskrit, Kalyana Mitra, a good friend. And this is someone, it's usually a superior, but doesn't necessarily have to be, sort of lording, in fact, doesn't lord it over you, but who takes you under their wing, kind of a mentor, and encourages you. A very famous story in Buddhism is that he and Buddha and his attendant Ananda were with each other one day, and Ananda, who he was Buddha's distant cousin, he was the guy who sort of watched out for him, his valet, we might say. He said, "Oh, blessed one, I realize that half of the spiritual life is friendship." Because he was thinking about the Sangha, the community of monks. And Buddha said, "Ananda, no, you're wrong. All of spiritual life is friendship." And he explained how this was. And it was precisely through the sharing of the teachings and the mutual encouragement. Um, and that's why, I mean, in Buddhism, you pay homage to and take refuge in Buddha, the teacher, Dharma, the teachings, but also the Sangha, which is the community of people who seeks to follow the example of Buddha and embody the teachings, live them out. And you can only do this in community. And that's why monastic communities, I mean, some people have suggested that the historical Buddha sort of invented monasticism as a way of encouraging people to really develop their awakening. And we see that that's a common theme throughout Buddhist history, the interactions with others, uh, usually in a helpful way, sometimes maybe not so helpful. But yeah, and actually some I certainly have found in again I tend to speak out of my own experience. The some of the groups that I participate in, I have often found. I mean, I'm a professor, so of course I know everything, and I have to be the smartest person, and blah blah blah. But I sometimes find that I have that tendency. And so in like group discussions and stuff, I'll be aware of that and think I want to hold back on that because that can be a bit annoying. But usually I don't have to because everyone else is so freaking smart and has such such insight into what we're talking about. I'll just be going, "Oh my gosh, that person." I'll even tell one of my friends, I'll say, "Wow, I'd always been trying to figure out how to say that. You said that so perfectly." And I mean, I have found that just manifests itself fully right there with others. And I found that's actually I think why I got into teaching. Because I found that although, yeah, I'm supposedly someone who has knowledge, but really and maybe, okay, I have some, but everybody has some. And I've found that I learn more from my students because my students actually teach me. That's the secret. The secret to being a professor is to realize that your students are your best teachers. And there's a joy in that. It is so fulfilling. So there is a type of a friendship. It's kind of interesting that we also have in the Chinese tradition of Taoism and also in Confucianism this same notion of friendship. And there are so many interesting stories of what we might call friends in the way, friends in Tao, who um, share with each other. And that seems to be part of the way, whatever way it may be. So,
So you'd then say that the myth, the ritual, and spiritual practice that we were talking about earlier,
yeah,
or rather, friendship is essential for that,
yeah, I think
in
so.
both like the philosophy side and also your own personal experience.
I would say so. Yeah, that's so. Storytelling always involves, again, the stories that we have always involves many characters. It's sure there's the main one or whatever, but they're always there with others. And rituals are they're usually, in fact, they are physical actions in time and space. Typically, they're with others, and they're usually coordinated. And again, there is something I always think interesting. My daughter, this is a tangent, but it's related. My daughter is a high school band director. And she is always talking about how wonderful it is when the whole band is able to get together and get in harmony, and they're able to do it by working together. And there's something that and you can even see it in and hear it in her voice, see it in her eyes when she's talking about that moment of where it all comes together, and and that is just inherently meaningful, I would say. And yeah, I think there's something spiritual in that for her, definitely.
That's really interesting, and definitely relevant. I want to switch a little bit to your earlier roots that you mentioned in comparative religion.
Mhm.
I think you mentioned at your seminary
Yeah.
studies, and having studied both the Eastern and Western traditions, where do you see the most fruitful points of dialogue between the two? We talked about earlier the common misconceptions, but yeah, where do you see like the dialogue happening?
Um, Part of it, I think, we are coming more and more to at least move away from the older idea of trying to convert everybody. I think that although there still are plenty of people who want to do that, I think I think the in terms of the interaction and dialogue between different faith traditions, it's about opening up to each other. It's about forming friendship, really. I mean, it is, and seeing, not expecting to be the same, and not trying to prove that anybody's wrong or better, but just see what's actually going on with others. And when you do that, you find, again, this it seems to me like this is basic primal connection that's there, that and you and there's maybe it's just a simple human recognition of each other as being fully human together, trying to figure things out. And we can often, when we can recognize that or even lead with that um, notion, we find that it's like any conversation, it's actually mutually enriching. And we don't have to, we can't be the same. We can't fully be exactly alike, but there's so much we have in common, this basic common ground that when we recognize each other, we come face to face with each other. And we find that also there are a lot of things that are not good about our world that other people agree with us. We can actually work together to, issues with climate change. We're all threatened by climate change these days. I mean, all of us. And I think it's this togetherness working on shared issues of again, nobody likes horrific violence. Okay, can we cooperate? That can we find solutions? Um, we know that poverty and disparities in wealth, that is a problem that all of us can recognize, and we all, even those who are very wealthy. I mean, I think I'm doing pretty well, but I'm harmed by that. I can feel the harm of that there are people who don't have as much and people who have a lot more. And are there things that I can? I think there are ways of finding common solutions, ways to lessen the harm. Again, maybe ahimsa is a principle, something like that, that maybe that's a universal thing. I'm sort of inclined, the older I get, to agree. Yeah, there is a certain universality in there, that, and maybe ahimsa is a way of getting at that. Um, Compassion, this which is really just recognition of. the similarity between us, that we're different, but and we're not the same, but we nonetheless can identify with each other a little bit.
Yeah, and kind of on top of that, not only like working together as you're saying, but also how do you think that we should think about religious truth in such
Mm,
like a pluralistic world
yeah,
where multiple traditions make competing claims?
that one is a really, really tough one.
Yeah.
And I certainly don't have an ultimate solution. I don't know whether there's. I'm not sure with having multiple, shall I say, notions of ultimate religious truth. I don't think those are necessarily bad. Because, well, again, what I tend to be more interested in is what's going on here with us together. And I've found I mean, yeah, it's a fact that people have different religions, different beliefs, different practices. That is a fact. And trying to force us all to agree on everything, well, that's impossible. We've tried that. That's impossible. It's just it's difference isn't bad. Difference actually allows us to see sameness, or at least similarity. Again, finding the common ground beneath or maybe running through the differences enriches us. So again, I'm curious actually about when people talk about their religious truths or whatever. Well, what does that mean? I mean, because again, once we start getting beyond these kind of labels, these abstract notions, and interact, speak with each other, sit with each other, um, those things, they, I don't think they matter that much. I don't. I mean, I kind of look at it, and I've read this in a few places. I think this is really interesting. Um, I'm married. Okay, I have a woman to whom I'm married, and I love her very much, and think she's the best woman in the world for me. She is, obviously. I don't know if she feels I'm the best man in the world, but you have to ask her. But I many people I know who are also in relationships with other people, they have deep connections with their most significant others, and would think that person's the best in the world. Okay, yeah, best for you, not best for me. But I can see why you feel that way. I mean, there's a sense of sort of felt familiar truth versus, let's just say, just because my wife is the best for me, I'm not saying is therefore she's the best woman in the world. She's for me. She is. I don't know if that helps, that analogy helps. I sometimes think claims for religious truth are really ultimately sometimes rooted in this just emotional truth that we all have, and we don't have to see e- them as necessarily somehow competing with each other. Best for you, best for me. Yeah. And I can identify with that notion of finding someone like that. And that makes sense to me. More power to you. I hope you can keep going. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a very powerful note to end on. And as we are coming to the end of our time here, are there any current projects or ideas that you're currently working on that you can share with us as a final note?
Yeah, I can. I have actually, we all are on, again, to use the familiar notion of a story, of a journey. I think I may have mentioned to you before we started recording that I'm going on sabbatical, taking a break from my teaching, which I've been doing for a long time. Need a break. I'm actually getting intentionally involved in contemplative studies. So I'm actually going to be training to get certified to teach mindful-based stress reduction type of meditation, which I have already been integrating into my classes for a little bit. And I'm also intentionally working on becoming better, more skilled at Tai Chi Chuan, which is a type of meditative martial arts, with the idea that I might be able to go on and teach this as I get older. So I would say that, again, finding ways, I'm more and more interested in finding ways of engaging with these ideas and notions that I've been studying, but in a very sort of, shall we say, real down to earth way that's easy to share with others. Maybe not in a formal college classroom. I tend to think that that is where I'm being drawn these days. That and there are also some other side projects because I the thing about me is that I'm very eclectic. So I have a lot of different things going on. I'm also getting more involved in studies of the supernatural and and connections to religion, ghosts, monsters, and things of that sort, which is again kind of a fun thing to think about.
Wow, yeah, that definitely does sound fun. As we're out of time, Dr. Thompson, thank you so much for this conversation. Your
Sure.
insights into Buddhist myth, ritual and violence, and friendship, and the comparative study of religion and finding a universal truth or not finding a universal truth. Or religious truth have definitely opened up a very thoughtful way of seeing how different traditions speak to compassion, suffering, meaning, friendship, and peacefulness ultimately. Is there any place our listeners can go to learn more about your scholarship in Buddhism?
Oh, goodness gracious. Um, Uh, I have to say, I kind of shy away from social media for various reasons. So I would prefer not to go down that road. Um, I don't know, Ria. I mean, they could, if anyone's interested in contacting me, you can go through Christopher Newport University and find me, John Thompson, there. Um, I would say this. I did want to leave you all with this. Um, There is a wonderful Buddhist teacher who has his own, there are many of them, by the way, but one in particular, Mingyur Rinpoche. He has a YouTube channel. And I would highly recommend anybody to go onto YouTube and look his stuff up. He's got some wonderful things about monkey mind, the notion of your mind jumping around. And he's really good at explaining certain esoteric Buddhist ideas in a way that work well for contemporary Westerners. And he's really funny. And he's got an autobiography called "In Love with the World," which is based on his own experiences, and it's incredibly insightful. And I would encourage you to look at that. So,
Well, yeah, I'll link his YouTube in the description.
yeah,
Well, with that, thank you for joining us on Mapping the Divine. To our listeners, I hope today's episode sparked your curiosity about Buddhism, and thank you again for being with us today, Professor Thompson.
yeah. Thank you. I appreciate it. You're more than welcome.